Thank you for watching Conscious Consumer Network. The live stream broadcast is free to view. You can pause and rewind live broadcasts to catch up, or view shows at a later date by accessing our free archives of all shows. Check out our broadcast guide to see what's on. You can show your support by donating to our network support fund. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, or subscribe to the monthly newsletter for updates. We thank you for supporting free and independent media.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Mel V, coming to you live from Conscious Consumer Network headquarters here in Portugal. It is great to be with you for our scheduled slot of Stop South African Genocide. And of course, as always, I'm accompanied by my co-host, Karin Smith, who's all the way in Texas. And tonight we're going to be picking up part 3 with Skulk van der Merwe of his epic knowledge on the history of South Africa. So before I get carried away, I'm going to let Karin jump in here and say hello to everybody.
Hello, everybody. I'm very glad to be back with you. I'm sorry about last week, but I came down with some incredible allergy to the cotton picking that they're doing around here. And my voice just disappeared. I had a little croak and then a little squeak, and then there was nothing left. And the guest we had last week was a very difficult interview to do, so I didn't want to be unvoiced and whispering at him, so we've scheduled it for another day. But I'm very glad to pick up with Skulk tonight. His knowledge of South African history is unbelievable. You can ask him anything and he'll come in with an answer for you. For me, it is just the greatest thing ever. So good evening, Skulk.
Hi, Karin, and hi, team. Thank you very much for having me again.
Oh, and I have to tell you, Skulk is broadcasting on his phone from a hotel room, and he tells me he doesn't have very many clothes on, so that's why we don't have a picture.
Karin, don't do that.
Because we are not known for our nudes or our movies. We don't do that here yet. We may one day, but not today. Skulk, we're very pleased to have you.
You will have to pay me a lot of money for that.
Oh, I would imagine so. And doesn't do these things for nothing, you know. So, Skulk, we spoke last time about the Afrikaner wish for freedom. Freedom not just for the Afrikaners, not just for the voortrekkers, for everybody. Everybody in South Africa should have freedom, the freedom to live under their own rules, with their own king or chief or whatever they believe in, worship their own gods, and be free to live with their own culture, which we provided to a certain degree under apartheid, but we're not up to the apartheid yet. We crossed the Drakensberg last time with everybody hauling up all their possessions on leather thongs and lowering them down on the other side and putting the wagons back together and starting back off on their trek. So can we join those adventurers, those pathfinders from that point?
Yes, definitely, Karin. Yeah, it's indeed an epic part of the history of South Africa, not only for the white nations, also even for the black nations. Just to pick up where we left last time, just before the time that the voortrekkers started moving into the interior of South Africa, you had a huge amount of turmoil amongst the black tribes that were moving in from the north, and that was solely due to what was called the Mefican and the Defican, and it was basically the Zulu Empire growing bigger and bigger and bigger under the King Shaka Zulu, the very well-known Zulu King Shaka Zulu, and because of his wars and his empire building, there was a huge disturbance of the black tribes as they were moving south from Mozambique and even further to the north, and even into the interior of South Africa beyond the Drakensberg. And the voortrekkers just happened to also stumble upon that. So when they went into Natal, it was relatively peaceful at that stage. The whole area between Zululand and what was the Xhosa territory further to the south, there was a whole stretch of land that they actually bought, that became the Republic of Natalia. That was basically depopulated. There were nobody left there. It was a buffer zone between the two nations, the Zulu nation in the north and the Xhosa people in the south. But into the interior, it was quite different, with large numbers of Nguni people moving into the interior, away from the Zulus, cannibals, and eating the others and so forth, because they were literally starving to death. Their cattle herds were taken off by the Zulus, etc. It was quite a miserable scene that faced the voortrekkers moving into the interior of South Africa.
And we also need to talk about the huge slaughter at that time. Scott, we don't have figures because, I mean, nobody had a written history at that time, but we estimate millions of Black people were slaughtered during that movement of the Nguni people from the north to the south, especially by the people who became the Zulu nation.
Yes, that's a fact, Karin. It's impossible. Today we can't put numbers to that, but it must have been a huge event, a displacement of many tribes, hundreds and hundreds of little villages simply burned down and genocided by the Zulus. And then, as a knock-on effect, if you displace like you have said, the immigrants now going into Europe because of the troubles in the Middle East, exactly the same happened during that era in South Africa. When you displace a certain amount of people into all directions, they go and fall upon the next people in line, and that causes those people to become displaced. So it was a huge turmoil that was going on in the hinterland of South Africa. The Sotho nation, the people today living in the kingdom of Lesotho, in the olden days it was called Basotho land, or the Protectorate of Basotho land. The Sotho nation didn't even exist at that point. They were only later on basically herded together by King Moshweshwe, and he went and he took a lot of stragglers in with himself, and he built himself a huge kingdom in the mountains, and his capital city was called Tababosego, the mountain of the night, because it was a very high black mountain. They lived basically on top of that. So that the Zulus couldn't come and destroy their villages and kill them off. So you even had the forming of nations. The Zulu nation itself did not exist around the 1790s and 1800. It was only by the 1830s that the first time that we see something called the Zulu nation there, and they derived their name from Shaka Zulu, the king that united them. The people to the south, the Nguni people, the Xhosa people, they were well known to the white settlers, of course, previously, because we came into contact with them during the early 1700s and mid 1700s when we basically clashed. We were more moving north and they were moving south. We clashed about around the Kai and the Fish River, so we were quite known to those people. But a huge amount of turmoil, as I described, was going on in the interior of South Africa. The Matabele tribe, for instance, the Matabeles were basically Zulus. They were part of the Zulu Empire, and then their leader, Mlizakatsi, we called them Silkats. The voortrekkers struggled with the name, and they usually made it a little bit more easy to pronounce. Now, Silkats was part of the Zulu Empire, but he at some stage also had a disagreement with the Zulu king, and because of that, now at that stage it was the Ngane already. He basically took his whole tribe and he fled into the interior. But being a Zulu, he was quite a warlike and troublesome figure, and he started to displace a lot of people around him. And the voortrekkers also had many fights and many battles that they fought against the Matabeles, and eventually the Matabeles fled all the way to today's Zimbabwe, where they are still living today. So that is how far the Mefekan and the Defekan, this huge turmoil of the black tribes, it went to what, if you look at the map of Africa today, even to as far as Zimbabwe in the north.
Yeah, it was a terrible time of which there is very little written history. So we only know what affected the Voortrekkers and what the Zulus themselves tell in their stories, which is how they tell their history and spread their history, was in stories that the storyteller of the tribe would tell around the campfires so that people knew their history. And these people, they had witch doctors, and they still do today. But the witch doctor was a very important person in the tribe.
Oh yes, yes, certainly. If you want to have a comparison maybe to the American Indians in the in North America and even to our own forefathers about 3,000 or 4,000 years back in Europe, the medicine man or the Sangoma in South Africa, they are usually called Sangomas. They were extremely important people in the community. So much so that in many cases they were the actual kingmakers. They were actually the people who decided who would run the royal households and so forth. And of course the African people are by their very nature and their culture extremely not religious as such, but spiritual in the sense that these medicine men and the forefather ghosts that they believe in and these things, it counts an extremely much in their way of thinking and seeing the world. There's also a direct connection for them between the forefathers that passed on and the living that's still in this world. There's a very close link to that. The animism, when you believe in the forefathers and so forth. And yeah, unfortunately, because we are only dealing with men here, not gods per se, it happens so that many of those medicine men would abuse their power. And they would use it for cruelty and very serious and crazy stuff that they do even today. You will sometimes read in the newspapers of muti killings. Now, muti killing is basically where they go and they kill a human off to take his fingers or his eyelids or his eyes or whatever they can use for medicine. That's nothing unusual for the black people, and especially at that stage. It was certainly not something strange. I mean, they harvested and they cannibalized one another at a tremendous rate. It was quite a terrible thing.
And it's so funny to me, well, not funny, it's actually quite scary that is coming back to South Africa, unless it was always there but very hidden, because we had that entire village a couple of weeks back where the man went and handed himself in at the police station carrying a human arm and said, well, you need to help me because I'm tired of eating human flesh. And when they investigated him, they found that the whole village of 300 people had been cannibalizing people for how long, nobody knows. So it's coming back to South Africa, or as I say, it may just well have been well hidden until now.
Yes, I think it was always endemic to the to the African scene. If you look at if I can jump a little bit to the history and the politics of Central Africa, you had a president there, one of these dictator presidents for life with these huge titles. They are usually Admiral, General, something.
Yeah.
But in the Central South African Republic, there was one of the presidents who actually, and it was common knowledge, it was not a secret, it was common knowledge that he was a cannibal. He would eat his own subjects, and that was only 2 or 3 decades ago. And it's certainly the whole issue about tribalism and going back to the roots and all these things. I think it definitely have that effect that they are definitely going back to their traditional ways. Many of them. Some of them are turning totally Western, of course. They are seeing themselves more in American culture and expressing themselves in that way. But many of them are turning back to their roots. And you also see it in the politics where it's becoming very ethnic and very tribal. There's Zulu factions in the ANC and there's Xhosa factions in the ANC and so forth. And you on a very increasingly basis, you would hear reports. Excuse me. You would hear reports of Muti killings and so forth. Something very interesting, which if you don't live in Africa, you won't even know about these things. But a certain amount of black people are actually not black. They are born white with blonde hair and blue eyes, albinos.
Yes.
And albinos are seen as something very strange and very odd in the black culture because they are white. They look totally different from the rest of people. And they are actually seen as having magical powers, and it's not unusual for albinos to be killed off and their body parts used in Muti. Now it may sound like horror stories that we are telling the people out there, but if they go online, they can actually read this in mainstream media in South Africa. It's not a horror story. These things are actually happening. They are catching albinos and they are killing albinos. So that in the black culture, if you have an albino child, usually that child is hidden away as far as possible to ensure that the child is safe. So it's a lot of things going on. Animals also part of the poaching industries. It's not about food as such that they are poaching animals. They are poaching it for medicine, for Muti. And so on. So it's definitely, I think that's my opinion, and I can only base my opinion on the incidents that I can read, and it's becoming more common. So I don't have statistics, but my opinion is that it is definitely increasing at this point in time.
The reason I brought this up, Skalk, is so that one can see that the African is not the noble savage that is portrayed in movies like Shaka Zulu, etc. They have an inherent violent nature that doesn't mesh with the Western way of living at all. And so for me, it illustrates the shock from both sides when the Zulus or the forming Zulu nation met up with these white people who were they're not albinos, but they're not black. And they have these firearms, which are very strong medicine, etc. The culture shock for both races must have been severe. And I think it's important that we point out that it hasn't changed much in the last century or two. You know, people are people, and they don't change terribly much.
That's a fact. I deal a lot in business. I deal with black business people, and I have the greatest respect for them on a human level. I would not regard myself as a racist in any way. So you would always have the liberal whites coming to you and saying, yeah, but if you start pointing out these things, then you are a racist.
Yes.
I'm not a racist. I'm simply a realist. I can only relate to you what I see and I hear and I experience. So on a personal level, I have no problem with the next guy walking across from me in the street. But it's a fact. My culture is totally different from his culture. And my way of seeing things and experiencing things and relating to things and reactions to things, it's totally different. And I think it's so far apart that even till today, you cannot really find an integration of the two racial groups. Inside the white nation itself, there's Afrikaners and there's English and Portuguese and Greeks. They keep separate from one another. Now, if you can't even integrate inside the white group, then how is it possible to take these two totally opposing sometimes cultures and try to force them together? It's going to create conflict. It's as simple as that. Last week I was in contact with people from Austria, Oostenrijk, in Europe, not Australia down south, but Austria. And these Austrians were telling me that they live not very far from the border with Hungary. And they say to me that for us, if we think of Europe, we think of it as a unit. But for them living in Austria, being German, Austrian, 14 kilometers from them is the Hungarian border. And if you cross that border, it's a whole new world.
Yes.
There's nothing in common between Hungarian, for instance, and Austrian.
Mm.
And there's nothing in common between a Croatian and Austrian and so forth. Now, in South Africa now, the liberals come and they say to us, but there's so much common ground that we need to form this way of harmonious big society where everybody is equal and everybody loves one another. It's simply not realistic. It's causing, it's the forced integration of people. That is what's causing the problems. That is what's causing people to become racist in italics. Because it simply means that these people feel threatened, whether they're black or white, doesn't matter. They feel threatened by the other group, and fear becomes hate. And this is what's happening in South Africa. Black people fear white people, and it causes them to hate, and all the scapegoating and the bad-mouthing going on, but the same on the white side. The white people fear the black people, and that is why it later on starts to turn to hate, because that fear causes hate. And if you try to integrate these two groups, it's going to cause confrontation. It's going to cause trouble.
Yeah, I think it was very important that we highlight that, Scott, because as our history goes on, you will see how the groups were forced together very much against either group's will. And then apartheid came out of that. So that's why I wanted to highlight that at this stage where the two groups meet, because from then to now, not much has changed between the two groups of people, but we need to understand the history before we understand where we are today.
Yes.
So, okay, we've now gotten to the Mafeking or the Defeking, whichever you want to call it, with we don't know how many hundreds of thousands of black people genocided. We don't know if tribes were totally wiped out and never existed again. We had slaves. They took slaves from the other tribes. They took children. They took the cattle. They killed the men. Okay, so then where do we go from here?
Okay, well, last time we started to discuss, for instance, the Battle of Blood River and so on.
Which
what
is
happened was that
important battle.
Yes. In Natal, what basically happened in Natal, that Pieter Retief and his group tried to negotiate and buy and settle of certain lands from the Zulu king. The king at that stage was Dingaan. He was the brother of Shaka. Of course, he killed Shaka to take the empire from him. It's like the Game of Thrones, but the South African version of that. And of course, we know about Pieter Retief. In the end, Dingaan killed him, himself and his followers, and it caused the war between the Voortrekkers in Natal and the Zulus. The Zulus tried to wipe out the Voortrekkers, the Afrikaner, the Boer people moving in over the mountain. And there were different battles being fought. At Blaukrans, for instance, there was a huge slaughter, massacre of Voortrekkers, and especially women and children at that point. Ween in Afrikaans or in Dutch is sadness, is wanneer jy ween oor iets. Help me with that, Karin. I don't know what's the correct English term, but it's when you have great sadness, then you ween, you cry about it.
It's a huge sorrow.
It's like a lamentation, maybe.
Yeah,
the klaaglied. So, and why that happened was that at Wenen, for instance, there was also this huge massacre of Voortrekkers. And then the Voortrekkers banded together and they reorganized, and at the Battle of Blood River, they defeated the Zulu impis of Dingaan. Now, what's notable about Blood River is two things. The one is more militarily. If you look at the Battle of Blood River, it simply doesn't make sense. On the one hand, you have about 460 Voortrekkers banded together in their wagon lager, and on the other side, you have 12,000 professional Zulu soldiers, because they were professional soldiers. The only thing that the Zulus did was make war. And a huge battle took place. And during that battle, 16 December 1838, During that battle, what is notable is that the Zulus is not only defeated in detail and driven back into Zululand, and they are actually after that chased by the Voortrekkers until they reach Ulundi. But during this battle, there is not one casualty. There's only 3 people lightly hurt, but there's not one serious casualty, and not one person dies on the side of the Voortrekkers. On the Zulu side, it's a total wipeout to such an extent that the river on which this lager of the Voortrekkers was standing, when the Zulus tried to cross that, and they were killed in such numbers by the Voortrekkers, by the commando there, the river turned to blood, to red, and that is from there that the river, the name of the river stems, Blood River, the Battle of Blood River. There's estimations that say anything from 2,000 to 5,000 Zulus were killed that day, but not one on the Voortrekker side. Now, we're not speaking modern weaponry here. We're speaking of voorlaaiers, single shot guns. It's difficult to load. You can maybe have, if you're very well trained, 2 or 3 shots a minute from such a weapon. They didn't have machine guns. They had one little cannon. It was called Griekie. Griekie was basically used just to make a lot of noise, but because if you know artillery, you would realize a small little cannon like that, it makes a huge amount of noise, but it shoots just very nothing much else. Yeah. So don't get the idea of Europeans with advanced weaponry going in and slaughtering poor Zulu soldiers and impis in masses. That is certainly not what happened there. So from a military point of view, it's basically impossible to have a situation that happened there. But I will come to why it happened. And I'm Afrikaner in heart and soul, so I believe in these things. But I will come to that in a moment. Just to make... Yes, Karin.
Those weapons as well is after a couple of shots, they got so hot they would burn your hands.
Yes.
You had the men in the front with the weapons and the boys behind them reloading, but their hands were blistered and burnt because you couldn't reload this thing without really touching the barrel, because you had to put the shell in and then some cotton and then the gunpowder. I don't know which order it went in. Okay, I'm not a military person, and then push it all down ram it down with a ramrod, and then fire this thing. So they were so hot that they were blistering their hands with these rifles.
Yes. It's single shot muzzle loading weapons. It's the 1830s. We're not speaking modern warfare. We're speaking the type of warfare that you would have 15 years ago, 20 years before that in the Napoleonic Wars.
Yeah.
That's the type of weapons that we are speaking about. It was certainly far before the advent of the machine gun, for instance. The German Maxim built the first machine gun, and Gatling built it in the 1850s and 60s. So that's about a decade and a half or 2 decades later on. So it's not that we as I say, it's not modern weaponry that caused Blood River. There was something else, and that to the Afrikaner nation is still holy, because it was a gelofte, it was a covenant that we made to God, to say to God that if you give this battle to us, then we will celebrate this day that you give the victory to us. We will forever have this as a Sabbath, and then we will. It's still called today the Day of the Covenant, the Geloftedag.
Yes.
So we as Afrikaners, we actually believe there was godly intervention, because that's the only way you can ever try to make sense of what happened in Blood River. And why am I saying this? Karin, that was 1838. 1879, many decades later, now you're speaking already of Martini Henry breech loading rifles, which is quite an advancement over what the Voortrekkers had. The professional army of the British in the Anglo-British, the Anglo-Zulu War, went into Zululand in 1879. These are professional British soldiers.
Yeah.
In past ages, they were described as the best infantry on earth. The British always had the best infantry on earth. They still have the best infantry. These guys going into Zululand as a military force and being wiped out by the Zulus at the Battle of Isandlwana. Now, if the British can't beat them with their own professional soldiers, how decades earlier, 460 voortrekkers in a wagon lager, how can they survive this? So for Afrikaners, this is this great godly intervention that happened here. From a military standpoint, blood river was not even supposed to have happened. It was impossible.
Yeah, literally. But Scott, we haven't actually said how they prayed for a week.
Yes,
you know, I think that's equally important that they prayed for an entire week before the battle.
Yes, that's a fact. They went on commando, and they realized that they will have to put their force in such a way and such a position that they would actually be able to defend against the oncoming Zulus. Oh. And in for about a week beforehand, they were constant praying and prayers and these going out by the voortrekkers. So voortrekkers, of course, like the Afrikaners, even to my day, very religious, very pious religious. Like the Puritans that founded America, they were Calvinists, and they saw themselves as the pure children of God. So religion, the church of the voortrekkers was a very, very important part of their culture, and the way that they thought about what was going on around them. So it was a deeply religious experience to them at that point. And you're quite right. It was literally a daily prayer, and not once, many times during a day that they would pray for the victory and for their survival in Natal. Remember, what can they do? Their backs are literally against the wall, and the wall being the Drakensberg. You can't just simply pack up now and leave again. What do you do? The sea is on one side and the mountain is on the other. What do? You have to fight. And it's of great significance. This whole leading up to the battle, and Sarel here and these guys, they're making the covenant and asking God, but please intervene and give us the victory over our enemies. And it happens. And the second part of this, I said I want to narrate this in two parts. The second part is what happens afterwards. The voortrekkers doesn't go into Zululand and go and destroy everything now in vengeance. They go and they go up to Ulundi, and basically after that they make.
We have lost you. We've lost you, Skull. I'm sure he will be back any minute. We're dealing with South African internet. You know, what does one do about that? Are you back, Skull?
We don't want war with you. We simply want our freedom. So please give us our right to live on the land that we want. And they established the Republic of Natal, with Zululand still being in the north. And from there on, you will find that there was never again a war between the
Oh dear, we started out so well today, but this is South Africa, as I said before, and we're used to it. We just bypass the problems. He will be back. His internet will be in and out, and there's not very much that anybody can do about it. So he was talking about the Battle of Blood River, which for me was an amazing, amazing experience. What these voortrekkers did was they decided that there is a battle coming, so they would rather choose the spot and not the time, but the spot for themselves. So they found a place with a river at their back, and they made the circle of their wagons, and between the wheels of the wagons, which was the only place that people could crawl through, they put thorn bushes so that these Zulu warriors could not crawl between the wheels and get into the inside where they were encamped. They put the men in front of the wagons and the boys behind them reloading. They left their women and the smaller children elsewhere so that they were not in this battle. And as Carl said, for an entire week, They prayed. They knew the battle was coming. They knew they faced unbelievable odds, but they believed, as Scott said, that they are children of God. In fact, there are certain Boers who believe that they're the lost tribe of Israel. They believed in the Bible. It was literally the only book that a lot of them had. They taught their children to read and write from the Bible. They were very, very staunch Calvinists, which is a very strict way of living. And they prayed every evening as a matter of course. But in this particular instance, they prayed nonstop for a week. And then the Zulus started coming. Now, a Zulu warrior, I'm sure you've all seen the movie Chaka Zulu, or a movie of that type. They have these big leather shields. They have spears. And they normally took some kind of drug to enhance their battle ability. And they came through the long grass, so you didn't see them coming. Suddenly, these masses of Zulus rose out of the grass, beating on their shields and hissing through their teeth and shouting, "Bulala, Bulala," which means kill. And they were upon this little lager of white people within seconds, thousands upon thousands of them, as far as the eye could see. It must have been terrifying for about 500 people. Skalk, are you back?
I hope so. Can you hear me, Karin?
Oh, jolly good. You can take over from me. I just painted the picture of that battle. I think I did it correctly.
Oh, you did it that I'm even scared now, and I'm not scared. So
I love to paint pictures. It's a thing I've always told lots of stories to my kids and to other kids. So I'm really good at telling a story and painting a big, vivid picture from it. And I like that for people who are not South African, who don't get the picture of how horrifying this must have been.
Yes. On a purely personal level, what you describe here is exactly what happened. Part of the success of the Zulu tactic was fear. When you look at war movies and you see how they with their sounds and the way that they paraded and these big shields that they carried and the feathers on their heads, it was basically to embody fear into their opponents to such an extent that usually wouldn't even fight the Zulu people, the Zulu army. If the Zulu army came, you surrendered, because you knew that if you lost the battle, they would wipe you out anyway. So it was simply a good move not to make war with him. But as I narrated, what could the voortrekkers do? They couldn't just simply pack up and leave again over the mountains. So they were basically forced to be where they would and stand and fight. Yes, and from there on, as I described, we see the formation of the Republic of Natal, which is the first time that we actually have freedom again as voortrekkers, as Afrikaners. In the interior, there are other groups of voortrekkers moving in further north and having pitched battles in the same way as in Natal against the Matibeles and some of the other tribes, to eventually also come to a point where they basically defeat the black tribes and they create Boer states, Boer republics. So it's these little proto-states all over the place, these Boer republics that starts to form.
But they were very agricultural, weren't they, Skulk? I mean, they were not. They weren't city dwellers with big shopping malls, etc. They were basically an agricultural people who had cities, towns, where they would go to trade, etc. And they didn't really have an elected government.
No, let's look a little bit at how the Boer state, how that would have looked like. You're quite right. We're definitely not speaking of in any way urbanized population. I sometimes make the equation between them and the great move to the west in Northern America, where you had the cavalry going first and opening up the trails, and then these huge wagon trails will come over the prairies, and land being settled off, and the government would protect them. But that was not what was happening in South Africa.
There's no
The
cavalry.
voortrekkers were moving. There's no cavalry. There's no cavalry coming. You are the cavalry. If you can't stand and fight, you're dead. It's as simple as that. They are moving away from government. They are moving away from civilization. They want to be away from the British government running the Cape Colony, and that is why they are moving. And they're going into this vast, uncharted, unknown hinterland, and nobody knows what they will face. They have their own scouts, they are traders and so on that go before them, and maybe can show them a trail where they can move to. But it's basically virgin country. It's wild. It's Africa. Africa is a very special place, but it's also a very cruel place.
Yeah.
Only the fittest and the strongest survive in Africa. So what they're not even only facing the black tribes. They are facing animals, literally lions and leopards and these things and crocodiles and. But they want to be free, and that is why they are moving away from the British, and they try to establish the republics. Agricultural, that is where the name boer comes from. Boer in Afrikaans and in German and Dutch. Boeren in German, for instance, it simply means farmer.
Yes.
A boer is a farmer. And they were called boers because they were farmers. They farmed. So they didn't go into the interior and build large cities. They simply went, and where they established themselves as republics, people made farms for themselves. And not small farms, big farms laid out far from one another, because Afrikaners also don't like one another. We're always fighting the other one. So I think by necessity they had these big farms and big stretches of land on which they settled far from one another, because that is the way that we like to live. We are individuals by our very nature. We left Europe many centuries ago because we couldn't live amongst the Europeans. We were individualists that climbed into ships and went across the oceans to go and settle in a faraway land. So that is so part of our culture, we can't get away from it. It's part of our DNA.
But also, Scott, the land in South Africa is not that friendly, as you said. So they needed a lot of land to make anything work. Because if you had animals, there's not an abundance of grass, an abundance of rain, an abundance of anything except dirt, flies, mosquitoes, tsetse flies. There's an abundance of those things. But you needed a huge area of land in order to grow or raise animals, or you needed a lot of land to make a farm viable.
Yes, South Africa it's farmland. It's farm for the very simple reason that for many centuries we didn't have anything else to do there except make war. But that aside, we could only farm. I mean, what else was there? It was only later on in the 1870s that diamonds were discovered and gold were discovered and all these things. So we made a living out of farming. But Africa and South Africa specifically, is certainly not very suited to agriculture. You have extreme temperatures. You have extreme heat in the summer, extreme cold in the winter. So that in itself already causes farming to be quite seasonal. Then you have the problem of inconsistent rain. Even in the wetter parts of South Africa, and the wettest parts are now lying alongside the eastern coast, and that is occupied by the Zulu people and the Xhosa people, and the Swazi people and the Pedis up north and so on. So the land that the voortrekkers and Boers had to build their republics on was at best marginal agricultural land, but they had to make a living off of it, and that is why the units were indeed so big. Still today, you will find that farmland it's big. You have little plots. We call it plots, plotter around towns. But that's not how it usually looks like. In South Africa, a farm is huge. It's thousands of hectares big, and it was even so in those days. And you make a very good point in that the government of the voortrekkers was also based on their individualism. When they established these republics, it wasn't that all of a sudden there was now this big state service and public service and servants running all around, and policemen and nurses and these forth. You didn't have something like that. They basically had a small proto-government. It was called the Volksraad, and the Volksraad would basically be 20 or even less burgers. A burger is a citizen. He was elected from the male citizens, and they had a Volksraad, and the Volksraad would not even have like ministries. It would have one or two secretaries running certain things on a semi-professional basis. They didn't have a professional government per se.
Yeah.
They were basically it's as free as you can get. It's as free as you can get.
And it wasn't a full-time job either. These people
It's not.
who just met once a week or once a month or whatever, but they weren't. Politics was not a profession.
It was certainly not a profession. The age of professional politicians in South Africa amongst the Afrikaners only came about 1.5 centuries later from then on. So it's a fact. It's basically farmers and more prominent farmers and so forth would then be elected into the Volksraad, and they would meet up once in a blue moon and make certain decisions. And in the outlying areas, the districts, they would elect a commandant, a commandant, and he was responsible to make sure that all the burger citizens had sufficient weapons, and if there was any trouble, he would command them up, and they would go on commando, and they would go and fight as a civilian, as a civil force, a citizen force, and then simply return to their houses. So in a very strange way, if you look at the Germanic peoples in Europe around the time of the Roman Empire, that was exactly what was happening there. About 2,000 years before that, we actually went back to that culture when we established our Boer republics, where you lived on the land, you lived in peace, but if war brewed and trouble brewed, you would go on commando, you would go and fight the fight and return home. And that was how these people lived. They didn't want to go to war. They didn't want war. That was why they were leaving the Eastern Cape, because they were fed up with the constant wars between the British Empire and the Zulus. They were fed up with it. They simply wanted peace, and that is why they started moving north. So it was also, as I said, a very pious and religious society that we're dealing here. Beyond politics, the only...
Can you...
Yes, Karin?
When you finished your thought there, can you tell us about Nagmaal? Because Nagmaal was a big thing.
Exactly. I wanted to speak about Nagmaal now.
Oh, good.
You can clearly read my mind by now, Karin. But Nagmaal, now what is Nagmaal? That is simply communion, when the church comes together and they drink wine and they eat bread. Those are the only two sacraments that you will find in the Calvinist religion. It's not like the Catholics, for instance. I don't know, I think they have 7 or 11 sacraments, but we only have 2. The eating of the body of Christ and the drinking of the blood of Christ. And also, once in a certain time, all the people of a certain communion would come together. Now, because they were living so far apart from one another, they couldn't go to church every Sunday. But they would have their Nagmaal then on a certain given time, and then everybody would simply pack up their stuff, leave their homesteads, and go to Nagmaal. And sometimes these Nagmaals took a week, and they traded there, and they visited family, and it was a huge community activity that took place. So marriages, everything basically happened during Nagmaal, because that was the only time that they saw one another. The rest of the time they were living far apart as families, far apart from next homestead. So Nagmaal was this huge event, even in this the last century. Even ceased now, but she even still could relate the weekend of the communion, where everybody would come together. So it was an integral part of the whole society was this coming together, and then sometimes going to war. So basically, and this maybe sums up the Afrikaners so well, we're good at doing church, and we're good at doing war, and basically nothing else. And that's how we live. That is basically how we lived. As farmers, peaceful, we didn't want to disturb anybody. We granted peace to those around us. You will find many times that the Boers would go on commando and go and defeat a black tribal chief that was causing trouble not only for the Voortrekkers but even for the black tribes around him. They would go and punish him and just get him to be peaceful again. And that was basically that was the way that society managed itself. And for many years you will find in the time of the Boer republics, there's from time to time they would go to war against troublesome black chieftains. But there was no constant warring like you had the British Empire. At any point in time, they were fighting a war somewhere in Africa against the black tribes. The Voortrekkers didn't operate like that. They wanted peace. They wanted a stable society around them. For the very simple reason they was very small in numbers. So if a war would start and all of a sudden these huge masses of black tribes would start to move into the Boer republics, they could face physical annihilation. So it was simply not a good strategy to go to war constantly with the black tribes. What's always very interesting to me, after the formation of the ZAR, that's Zuid-Afrikaanse Republiek, it was the old Transvaal, it was the bigger of the republics. You had inside those territories certain areas designated as tribal areas, and those people lived in absolute peace with the Boer people, the Afrikaner people in those areas. They had the old tribal kings, the old own tribal councils. They governed themselves. They lived as free people around the Boers. If I remember his time correctly, there was one incident of a certain Mokopane, if I remember correctly, a king in the northern part of the old Transvaal, and he became very troublesome at some point, and they simply went and they punished him, but they never destroyed and they never genocided like the British did. And I want to emphasize this again. This has always been, and you started this program with what you said. The key feature of the Afrikaners have never been that we want to conquer and we want to rule over the rest of the people in South Africa or in Africa for that matter. We simply want our own little land, our own little piece of earth where we can simply go and live and be ourselves. And you find it as the constant thread going through our history. From the trekboers back in the 1700s, right through to the people moving to the Eastern Cape and later on becoming the Voortrekkers and building the Boer republics. We simply wanted peace and we wanted freedom. And that is today. It is still today what we want the most in our hearts, just to get our freedom back.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Scott. But I mean, even then, okay, so now you have these little republics and you're living relatively peacefully. You're always going to have these little skirmishes with black tribes because they want to steal your cattle and you don't want your cattle stolen, etc. But in general, it was very peaceful. And then that came to an end too, didn't it? Because people
just say again, Karin?
The world would never leave you in peace. It had to intrude and cause more trouble again. So you had this short period of relative freedom and peace, and then the world intruded again.
Yes, once again, and this time around, it was certainly not the black people. It was once against the British Empire, because when the British realized that Natal was now all of a sudden a Boer republic. The Boers were establishing a republic there. And they had land that was certainly not the Zulus' land. I think that the British authorities at that point in time then had to make a choice. And that choice was simple. Do we let the voortrekkers simply go, or do we go after them and simply take what they built up for themselves? And eventually, what happened was that the colony of Natal was established. The British took over the land of the Boers, and they established a colony there, and it caused another trek of many of the voortrekkers saying, but we're not willing to live under the British. Then we will trek back over the mountains and go and live on the other side. So yes, now you have the British again coming to the Boers and Afrikaners and basically starting to take away the freedom of the Boers by annexing, and that actually it actually happened in 1843. I think 1843 or 1844. They basically just simply by proclamation said, the Republic of Natal doesn't exist anymore. It's a colony of the British. You are British subjects, and they sent their troops at Port Natal to Durban, and they basically took over the Republic back from the British.
But they didn't take Zululand from the Zulu king.
No, they couldn't because they simply didn't have the numbers to go and make a war against the Zulus. They simply fell upon the small, newly established Republic of the Boers, and they took the freedom away.
Mm-hmm. So once again, these people packed up their wagons, crossed the mountains, crossed the rivers, and went to live in proximity to like-minded people, but not too close.
Yes. You will find in the interior, because that was a little bit more difficult. President Creer always said that if you can find the ocean, you will find the Britishman. They tend to come from the sea, and it was very difficult for them to go and subjugate the Boer republics in the parts of South Africa. But because it was very easy to.
Their supply lines would have to be too long.
Yes, indeed, and it's difficult. It's difficult to make war in a country like South Africa, as we discussed already. It's dry, it's wild, it's a harsh environment. There's not many towns. Remember, in those days, still today, big armies moving will usually live off the land. So say they will take over towns and cities, and they will live off what is there. In South Africa, there was nothing. So how do you support a big army moving into an area? It was one of the key factors of why the Anglo-Boer War of many years later took so long for the British to come to an end, because it was a very difficult way of making war and fighting a war. But in the inner parts of South Africa, the Boers established themselves into very strong republics: the Republic of Winburg, the Republic of Soutpansberg, and the Republic of Potchefstroom, and all these that in the end amalgamated into two bigger republics, being the Orange Free State, the Republic of the Orange Free State between the Orange River in the south, the Vaal River in the north, and the Zuid-Afrikaanse Republic, the South African Republic beyond the Vaal Rivier. It was also called Transvaal, meaning across the Vaal. And that is where those two big republics came from. In Natal, in the northern part of Natal, there was a republic called the Republic of Vryheid. And that was the new republic, the Nuwe Republiek. It was later also incorporated into the ZAR. And that is where the two classic Boer republics of the Free State. I'm still a Free State. I live in the Free State. That is where that came from, the Free State and the Transvaal. That later on fought the British in the two Boer War. Definitely in the Second Boer War. The First Boer War was also, of course, only in Transvaal.
Yeah.
But that is where that came from. Yeah.
So we're just about up to the Boer Wars, aren't we? Because now we have another period of relative peace. Or have I missed some important part here?
No. There was a lot of politicking going on. As from the time of the voortrekkers leaving, because the British realized they were losing subjects. And if you lose subjects out of your colony or your kingdom, what are you actually losing? You're losing the economic viability of that colony. So it was a huge problem. In fact, there were ordinances made to say that those people that trekked the Orange River, they were now seen as traitors to the crown. That type of situation,
Wow.
in an attempt to bring them back. But of course, the Boers they established themselves, and eventually they were recognized at the treaties of the Centreville Convention and these forth. These republics were then eventually recognized because, in fact, they were there. They couldn't be denied anymore. By the middle of the 1800s, you start or you see the start of the mining revolution in South Africa, because in Kimberley diamonds are found. And all of a sudden, the British Empire realizes, but in Africa, there's a lot of very nice stuff. A lot of gold, there's a lot of diamonds. So if it's there, we want it.
Because we are expanding our empire and we're running short of cash. So this looks like a real big opportunity. Let's go get it.
That's unfortunately, and I'm not being anti-British by saying that. I'm certainly not anti-English. But that was unfortunately the view of things, especially after diamonds were discovered in South Africa, and that was later on the town of Kimberley was built there, the big hole of Kimberley. All of a sudden you had a huge rush into that area, a diamond rush of hundreds, if not thousands of foreigners, all of a sudden flocking to South Africa, being totally foreign to the way that the Boer people were living. Now Kimberley lies in at the confluence of the two rivers of the Vaal and the Orange, and that was part of the Republic of the Orange Free State. But then Kimberley grew up, and there were numerous disputes about who owned that land. It was the British. They were saying it was their land, and certain of the Griqua people were saying it was actually theirs. And the Boer Republic said, but that's the borders that we've always had. But in the end, it went into a phase where the Republic of the Orange Free State basically retreated to a point where they said, let's cut off this, and you will still find this awkward border that doesn't exist. It's only in your mind that border exists. And they formed a border north-south, and they basically cut off the diamond areas. This is how they wanted peace. They basically cut off that very rich area in where all the diamonds were, and they said to the British Empire, take it, but just leave our peace. Just leave us. And in a treaty eventually, and an arbitration, an international arbitration, it was decided that those diamond lands would go to the British, and the Boer Republic of the Orange Free State existed on its own to the side of that. And that once again, it demonstrates the nobility of the Boer people. They would rather not even have the diamonds that could enrich them, but they would maybe corrupt them. They left that to the British and said to them, just leave us in peace. You can have the diamonds, but just leave us in peace. So it demonstrates something to me.
Do you think that has to do with Calvinism, that your faith is bigger than finances? What do you think is the driving force behind that we'll give up all this money, and it was enormous riches, enormous, but we'll give it up because it's going to impact our way of life too much?
I think it's very deep-seated. Now today you find that Afrikaner people are very industrious. They are business people. Many are in the professions. They're making a very good living for themselves. There's a very large part of the Afrikaner population that's because of the black empowerment laws and employment equity laws and so forth has fallen into great poverty. But you still find, and this has always been a feature of the Afrikaners being a very industrious nation. We're always busy. We're always dealing and wheeling and making a living for ourselves. But even in those days, but it's very true what you're saying. I think for the average Puritan, pious Boer living on his farm, there was simply no use of being rich, of having this huge amount of diamonds. Now looking back, it was a fault. If they kept the diamonds, the Orange Free State would have been the richest republic or the richest area in the world for that matter per capita. They could have built this wonderful modern state for themselves. But I think in the heart of hearts, they saw what was going on there as the Sodom and the Gomorrah. It was ugly, it was sinful, let's cut it off. It's like a cancer in our system. Let's just cut it off and leave it there. The British can have it.
Because it wasn't it, Skulk? I mean, once, you know, you look at any gold or diamond rush. So you look at the rush for these diamonds, and people did the most terrible things. I mean, they brought in drinking, prostitution, gambling, murders, all the bad things that people do for money were brought in by these thousands, if not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of foreigners hoping to make a quick buck. So all the bad things that these religious Calvinistic people didn't want to have any part of were suddenly thrust upon them.
Yes, that's a fact. That's a fact. These people are living in isolation, and they see one another at the church communion. That is literally how this is going down. But now you have all of a sudden you have an urbanized society. You have a huge number of men, because it was usually men that came with these diamond rushes. It's not a proper society that you're having. And of course you have all the evils of the worst evils of society all of a sudden appearing in a society like that. Prostitution, because there's no women to marry.
Yeah.
So what can these people do? Prostitution was certainly rife. Drunkenness, violence. So it's totally contrary to what the Boer is being raised to be and what he is. It's sinful. It's ugly. It's not how we're supposed to do things. So that's very true what you're saying.
So I can sort of see that as a group of people, they were just so shocked by this intrusion of wickedness on their peaceful, God-fearing way of life that they were quite happy to cut it out like a cancer and say, okay, you have it. We don't need this. This is what we've been running away from.
Yes, that's a fact, yeah. That's a fact. But remember that's the smaller of the two problems, being the diamond rush. The bigger of the two problems, of course, was when gold was discovered in Transvaal. Now, that was not in the far corner, like in the Orange Free State. That was smack right in the middle of the Republic of Transvaal, on the Witwatersrand, the Whitewater's Ridge. They found the most awesomely rich deposits of gold on earth. For many years, South Africa was, of course, the biggest supplier of gold, only maybe outmatched by Russia. But they found incredible wealth right there, smack in the middle of the Republic of the Transvaal, the South Afrikaanse Republic. And that it directly caused the British Empire to start to encroach. I believe still to this day, if diamonds and gold were never discovered in those republics, they would have been free for forever. But because the British realized that there were these incredible riches sitting in these areas, it became a problem for them. It's very interesting to note that there were no real animosity between the Orange Free State and the British colonial empire after the diamond lands were annexed by the British. But there was the constant trouble between the Transvaal Republic and the British Empire after the discovery of gold. For the very simple reason that the British wanted the gold. It's as simple as that. And right in the middle of the Transvaal, that happened in late 1870s. They discovered gold, and all of a sudden, the city of Johannesburg, for instance, simply came from nowhere. It was one day it was open land, the next day it's a city. And all the evils that we spoke about in the diamond fields were now sitting in the middle of the Republic of Transvaal. And it was actually called the Uitlander, the Outlander, the people from outside, the Uitlander problem. The problem of the Outlanders. How do we solve this problem? Because they are streaming there in their thousands. Johannesburg, for instance, grew from a city of 0 in less than 5 years to a city of 70,000 people. Now,
Wow.
it's not a very big city in terms of world population today, but imagine yourself being a Boer. The closest that you see people is maybe 15 or 20 kilometers away from you on another farm, and then all of a sudden, right in a smack in the middle of your republic is a city of 70,000 men sitting there, and about 150,000 black people moving into that area to work on the mines.
Because they needed the labor. They needed the labor. There were never enough white people to do the diggings and all the manual stuff that needed to be done. And it's not like it was here in the United States, where one guy would get his little claim and he'd work that claim and without help. He specifically didn't want help. But in the Transvaal, as the claims got bigger and as the more gold was found, they needed extra labor.
Yes, that's a fact, Karin. And beyond the mere numbers, we're also dealing with the cost of labor.
Yeah.
You can't pay a black man what you the little amount of money that you can pay, or a white man that you can pay a black man.
Yeah.
There's still today this huge disparity between what white people earn and what black people earn. And it's not a racist thing as such, but it's simply black people have always in South Africa, especially by the British, have always been seen as this huge mass of very cheap labor. So they were brought in. Yes.
No, we're not talking about university degree people. We are talking about hefting a pick and shovel. Literally.
Yes, exactly. So you had the tribal chiefs even benefiting from that, because agents would go out to the tribal chiefs, and the tribal chiefs would actually enslave their own subjects for money and send them into the diamond areas and the gold areas to go and work there. And the money earned there for that labor would sometimes not even go to the laborers in the mines. It would go back to the tribal chiefs. Even to this day, you will find the system in the far northern Cape, where the tribal chiefs of the Tswana people would send their subjects to go and work on the in the vineyards. They have huge vineyards there in the lower Orange River, and even to this day you find that the Tswanas will come as seasonal workers, and there's a deal made with the tribal chief, and he takes the biggest part of the pie, and the rest is given to the subjects, and that was exactly what was going on here. And as I said, Kimberley was growing up as the smaller of the two evils in the area that previously belonged to the Orange Free State, and in Transvaal it was the Witwatersrand, that area around Johannesburg, that all of a sudden became this huge sprawling urban mass industrial mining area that was totally contrary and totally foreign to the rest of the character of the Transvaal Republic. And it was this huge eyesore, if you want, this cancer right in the middle of the Republic. And very shortly after that, the Uitlanders started to realize, and we must also remember that there was a lot of agitation from the British Empire and influence from the British Empire. But the Uitlanders started to realize something. They started that their numbers have grown to such an extent in that area of Transvaal, that if they got the vote, they could outvote the traditional Boers. And if they outvoted, they could take over the government. It's as simple as that. So you had a succession of crises. First, they wanted to gain the vote, and the Republic of Transvaal, the government of Transvaal said, well, if you lived in South Africa for 7 years, we will give you the vote. I think at that point it was not very far-sighted from the Transvaal government, because I think they thought the problem will go away by itself. Gold rushes usually don't take that long. If the gold is gone, then usually the foreigners will leave again. But in South Africa, the deposit of gold was to such an extent. I mean, they are still taking out gold in Johannesburg to this day. It was so huge that the foreigners never left. So after 7 years, the Republic realized that they are still here, and they are not only here, they are increasing in number.
Yeah.
So the problem is growing bigger. And at that stage, it was decided that it was now not only 7 years, they had to live in South Africa for 14 years before they could get to vote. And that caused a huge amount of turmoil and dissatisfaction and agitation and all of a sudden political turmoil in Transvaal. And that led directly to, in 1896, I hipscop now because there was the first Boer War, but I will catch up on that a little bit earlier or a little bit later. But that political turmoil caused directly the Jameson incident where the British sent a private army that belonged to Cecil John Rhodes, but it was actually a British army. They basically sent it from the west into Transvaal to go and liberate, so-called liberate the Uitlanders there from this harsh rule by the Dutch, the Boer people.
So can we speak for a minute about Cecil John Rhodes? Because he's one of him and De Beer and Bonnie Bonato, those three are huge central characters in this whole story. And Cecil John Rhodes still is causing trouble in South Africa to this very day. So
to this very day, yeah.
To this day. So can we talk a little about him before we get into his art?
Yes. Cecil John Rhodes, very sickly Brit, leaves for South Africa. He comes to South Africa because his doctors tell him that you're very sick, that you must go to a drier climate. So he basically comes to the Cape Colony due to ill health. He ends up in Kimberley. He buys the beer mine from its original owners, and he was an extremely astute businessman, and he very cleverly and very quickly became hugely rich because of his diamond trade in Kimberley. But he was not only a businessman, he was also a politician. And due to his great wealth, he started to build himself up as a hugely successful politician. He was also very astute in his politics, because he realized that if he had the Cape Afrikaners on his side, and they voted for him, he would eventually become the most the strongest politician in the Cape Colony, which happened. He was eventually voted in as the premier of the old Cape Colony, and he establishes himself in Kimberley and in the Cape Colony as this hugely pro-Afrikaner, actually, because they loved Cecil John Rhodes, this pro-Afrikaner, pro-farmer. His policies tended to be pro-farming and assisting the farmers and all these things, and he establishes himself as that. But in his heart of hearts, Rhodes was certainly never a lover of the Afrikaner people, and especially of the independent Boer republics, because he stated it in so many words. He said, I want the whole continent from the Cape to Cairo to be red.
Yeah.
Red being the color of the British Empire.
Yeah.
Then, as I said, and I hipscopped a little bit in the 1880s, there was also, of course, troubles in the Transvaal. And the British, for the first time, they simply sent a force in 1880. They sent a force into the old Transvaal Republic. They rode up to Pretoria, the capital, and they simply annexed the whole Republic of the Transvaal. Overnight, they became the overlords of the Boers of the Transvaal again. And of course, the Boers didn't want any of that, and they very quickly organized their commandos, and the first Boer War ensued, and that ended at the Battle of Majuba, in which they in great detail defeated the British, and peace was attained again in 1881, and the British had to leave the annexation of the Republic of Transvaal, and Transvaal was re-established as a republic, and that caused a huge embarrassment for Britain. Remember, it's a small little Boer republic there in at the ends of the earth, and they actually won a war against the mighty British Empire. So it was this huge embarrassment. Majuba itself became this legend of how the British can fail and how they can be defeated. So it's this huge issue for the British. It's a personal thing for them, and that I think in Rhodes's mind at least, and many of the British in the colonial office, Chamberlain and Milner and all these guys, it causes this problem for them that we have to show the Boers that we are actually the overlords of Africa. Because if they can defeat us, then the Germans can do it too, and the French can do it too, and the Belgians can do it too, and then we lose Africa.
Yeah,
so
it will lose our entire empire, because they
yes,
the British Empire was the largest at that time. And
yes,
they had portions of everywhere in the world was British colonies. So if this little republic with a few people could defeat them, they stood to lose a hell of a lot more than just this little place.
Yes. I remember this caused troubles in 1885. There was a conference in Berlin, 1885 or 88, I'm not sure now, in which the colonial powers literally carved up the world. The British and the French and the English and to a certain extent the smaller nations. They literally cut up the earth to say that this part is yours and that part is yours and that part is yours. And I'm very sure for the British it was this huge embarrassment that they just came out of this war with this small little tiny republic where a bunch of farmers defeated them and drove them off. It must have caused huge embarrassment for them, and it's very true. The whole idea, you must remember that they are fighting at that stage. They are fighting colonial wars in India and in many parts of Sudan and in Egypt and all these places. There's wars going on. 1877, the Anglo-Zulu War that ended although Island Lawana took place later on, the British came back and they defeated the Zulus and they annexed Zululand. And all of a sudden, against the stream, you have the first Boer War in which they are defeated. So it simply didn't make sense. It wasn't part of the whole scheme. But the Republic of Transvaal was there, and it started to gain strength. Now we must also remember that although the Witwatersrand, the Uitlanders were causing a problem for the Transvaal, it was also a source of huge revenue. And especially President Paul Kruger, and that was one of the problems that the Uitlanders had with Paul Kruger, because Paul Kruger realized very early on that he could extract a huge amount of wealth for his republic from those Uitlanders. So he taxed them, and there were concession fees that they had to pay, and he was very clever in taking a huge revenue from that, and that caused the Republic of Transvaal to become very, very rich and a very sufficient state. It even had a state artillery. It could buy weapons from the newest, the best Moser rifles from Europe, from Germany, machine guns and this forth. And I think that the British had that this huge fear of what was happening in the Transvaal, because remember, just south from the Orange River, there's the Cape Colony, and 70% of the Cape Colony is still Afrikaners.
Yeah.
Although many of the Afrikaners left and they established the Boer republics, the Cape Colony itself is still Afrikaner.
Yeah.
You must remember, in 1870s, you had in the Western Cape, what is today the Western Cape, which is part of the Cape Colony, a huge upsurgence in the identity of the Dutch people, and more so the Afrikaner people. Die Genootskap van Regte Afrikaners, the Society of Real Afrikaners, was established by the Toy, for instance, in Parel in those days.
Yeah.
And in the Afrikaner Bond, not to be confused with the current day Afrikaner Bond, that was Afrikaner Bond was a political party in the Cape Colony. It centralized itself around Afrikaner interests. It was called the Afrikaner Bond. It's exactly what it was. It was a political party, and they dominated. Now, as I narrated, Cecil John Rhodes, being very clever and very astute, had the backing of the Afrikaner Bond for many years, because his policies led to the Cape Afrikaners being very rich and very proficient in themselves. But then the Jameson incident happened, and that happened in 1896, and after that the Afrikaner Bond officially cut its ties with Rhodes. So for the British, they are sitting on a very, very dangerous situation in South Africa, because in the north, the Republic of the Transvaal is becoming very rich. It's becoming powerful, although it has the Uitlander problem in the Witwatersrand. The Free State Republic, although much poorer, at one stage it was called the model republic of the world. Everybody is looking at the small little boy republic and saying, wow, these guys are really doing very well for themselves. They're living in peace. There's a very efficient state service. They're building excellent schools. They're building actually what is today still there, the Grey College, which is a grand school for boys, and the Oranje Meisie School for the girls. This republic, it's really a model republic. And the British are sitting with this problem. What do we do with the 70% Afrikaners in the Cape Colony if these guys, and there was actually a huge move throughout South Africa to have the Cape Colony to split off from the British Empire. And that would have meant that the British would lose their control of South Africa. They would simply have the small republic of colony of Natal on the east coast, but they would lose their primary base being the Cape Colony. So it's a confluence of all these influences and greed and everything.
Stop right there. So already in the 1800s, there was talk of the Western or the Cape seceding from South Africa. It wasn't South Africa then, but as it were, seceding from the rest of the country.
I know why you're asking me, relating to the Cape Party these days, saying we want to be free from the rest of South Africa.
I'm not even going.
It goes.
I'm not jumping that far ahead right now. That's somewhere we shouldn't go. But already then, there was talk of, we are an Afrikaner nation. This is our country. We're going to part from the rest of this. We don't want any part of it. We're leaving. So that is something that a lot of people don't know about. And I think it's also quite important to our story that time back, 100 years or more ago, they were already saying, I've had enough of this whole lot. I'm leaving, you know.
Karin, that's a fact, because remember what happens during the Anglo-Boer War. We're not at the Anglo-Boer War yet. Yeah. During the Anglo-Boer War, when the Boer commandos start moving into the Cape Colony, especially in the Eastern Cape, and remember, many of the Eastern Cape, the people living in the Eastern Cape have still family ties to the Voortrekkers.
Yeah.
They are family.
Yes.
So your nephew would live across the Orange River from you, and the one is a British subject and the other one is a free Boer.
Yeah.
In the Northern Cape, exactly the same. My family were Cape rebels, and this is where the Cape rebel thing comes from. So when the Anglo-Boer War actually starts, you find that the Boer commandos started moving into the Cape Colony, and the Afrikaners, the Cape Afrikaners, joined up in their thousands.
Yeah.
At the end of the war, 26,000 bitter enders were still in the field at the end of the war. And of those 26,000, I don't know if you're aware of that, 14,000 were Cape rebels.
Wow.
So there were more Cape rebels in the field at the end of the war than burghers from the republics. But during the 1870s, there's this bloom of Afrikaner nationalism. Now, Boers and Afrikaners, there's always this thing, is it now the same nation or is it not? To me, it's the same nation. But there is, I know you have a different view, but
no, I don't. I don't stop. I personally believe it's one nation. But if you If you listen,
There's differences. There's differences between the Cape Afrikaners and the Boers. There are differences,
absolutely,
but even among the Cape Afrikaners, there's this bloom of nationalism,
yeah,
and it rides on the back of the Afrikaner Bond, and it rides on the back of the Genootskap van Regte Afrikaners, and they start to see themselves not as the offspring of the Dutch anymore. They are seeing themselves as a totally new nation, being the Afrikaner people.
mm.
Um, and it's a history that's not being written. I think it was a forgotten history for a very simple reason, that the British wanted us not to really know about this. But if you really go and you see the political turmoil that was actually going on in the Cape Colony at that stage, the British was about to lose the Cape Colony. The Cape Colony would have seceded from the British Empire within a decade from there on. I have no doubt about that, because they saw what did they see? They see the Orange Free State doing very well. It's a model republic of the world. They see the Transvaal Republic being a rich Afrikaner poor republic, people governing themselves. But here they are sitting in the Cape, being British subjects. Now, most of them didn't have a big problem with the Queen. They adored Queen Victoria. But they didn't like the British authorities, as they've never liked them. So I think at some stage the Cape Colony would have reached that maturity where it would simply have had the plebiscite, and they would have voted to break away. Maybe as a like Canada or Australia, within the British Empire, but definitely not under the strict ruling of the British Empire as it was at that stage. It's a very precarious position that the British are finding themselves in at the turn of the century. But couple that to the huge greed for richness. What does Cecil Rhodes do? Cecil Rhodes go and he annexes Botswana land. Today it's called Botswana. There they find even more diamonds. But then he goes on. And in the land of the Matabeles and the Mashonas in the north, to the north of Transvaal, he establishes a country that was actually called Rhodesia, after Rhodes, the land of Rhodes. He establishes a whole country for himself. This is how rich and how powerful Rhodes is. What is today Zimbabwe was the personal empire. That was the land of Rhodes. It was called Rhodesia. It was named in his name whilst he was living.
Yeah.
And Rhodesia is immeasurably richer than South Africa. It has much better rainfall. The soil is very, very rich. It's prime. It's the best of Africa that you can have. And Rhodes knew that, and he took that for himself. And he ran that as his personal fiefdom. It was like his kingdom. He had his private army, the same private army that James later on led into the Transvaal. He had his own police force, everything that he basically ran there. And yeah, so you have I think maybe even a personal thing. Very strong men in the Transvaal. You're sitting with the tremendously strong personality of President Paul Creer, himself being an old voortrekker. He was in all the battles of the voortrekkers. He's this legendary figure sitting in Transvaal, this obstinate old boer that spits in a bowl when he doesn't like things. Literally, this is what Creer does. He's sitting there as this eyesore to the British of I will simply do what I'm doing. You will not, British Empire, you will not come and tell me what to do in my own republic. But just north and west to him, you sit with this tremendously rich and powerful Cecil John Rhodes, who wants Transvaal for himself. So there's a lot of dynamics at that point in time working together to eventually cause the Second Boer War. That was, I think, the most terrible thing that could have happened. It was a terrible war. It was the first war of concentration camps. It was scorched earth. It was genocide. It was a horrible thing that happened to the Boer nation. But all these things led up to that point.
So you were going to tell us, before I diverted your attention away from it, you were going to tell us about the Jameson raid, because it is a central, not even central, it's a beginning of all the rest of this. And
yes,
very important lead-in to what comes next.
Yes, yes. What basically happened was that there was a conspiracy in 1895, if I remember, 1896. The Jameson raid took place. There was a conspiracy of Uitlanders in Johannesburg, and Jameson sitting just across the border to the west of the Transvaal. And they conspired. The Uitlanders would start a revolt in Johannesburg, and then later start Jameson with his cavalry. Well, once again, the cavalry are riding in. They would simply ride in, and they would swoop away the Republic, and they would take over the whole scene. And it happened. There was a small uprising in Johannesburg, but not to the extent that they believed it would happen, because many of the Uitlanders were actually starting to settle into things and starting to realize that they could live with the Boers.
Mm.
And but still, Jameson came into the Republic with his cavalry, and he rode in, and just very not very far from Kreersdorp. He was actually stopped in his tracks by a Boer commando, and he was forced into surrender. And this caused this huge embarrassment all of a sudden in a personal capacity for Rhodes, because this is his private army. It's literally his private army.
Yeah.
But to a larger extent to the British, because they're still British subjects. And Rhodes is doing this on mandate from the British colonial authorities. Mm. They maybe didn't sign off the order for Jameson to go and ride into Transvaal, but the fingers are pointing at him. Mm. And it's like a smoking gun, literally, what's going on here. So it causes the Jameson raid causes this huge political embarrassment for the British. And it tells the Transvaal something very, very clear. It says to them, at some point the British will come again. If they can do it with a small private army that belongs to Rhodes,
yeah,
at some point they will come again. So from 1896 to 1899, you see that the Transvaal Republic, and they even sponsor the Orange Free State, start to import huge amounts of new Moser rifles from Germany, Krupp and Crusoe cannons, Maxim machine guns. They start to prepare themselves for war because they know it's coming. They know it's coming.
But they still have, they don't have a state, a national army, as it were. They still
no
private citizens.
No, that's a fact. What like always, like the position was always it was citizen force, the commando. Mm. Now to the British and later on in the World Commando is a small tiny group of paratroopers maybe moving in and doing a specific job and moving out. In South Africa, the commandos were something totally different. As I explained earlier, in the district you would choose a commander. He's chosen. It's an elected position. He's not an officer of an army. He's an elected official. And that it becomes his responsibility to organize his commando and to make sure that every able-bodied man can go on commando for a certain amount of time, basically climbing on his horse, taking his wagon, going into the field with not enough supplies and weaponry to go and fight the war. Mm. So it's a citizen force of literally overnight. We always have this idea in the Americas of Peter Stuyvesant riding with his horse and saying, the British are coming, the British are coming. Yeah. Now, exactly the same in South Africa. The commandeer oproep would have been overnight. You were commandeered, and the next morning you would climb your horse and you will go to war. That was literally how these guys were trained and how they organized it. They were trained properly to...
Was it voluntary? Was it voluntary, or was it your duty? Was there a penalty if you didn't answer the call, or did that not even come into it? People just did it.
You did it because you were a citizen. It's as simple as that. You didn't have a choice, and I don't think it would even have come into your mind not to go. There were certain you could apply to not be commandeered for instance, ill health. Yes. That type of thing. There were certain exemptions, but it would have been a dishonor if you were called up and for some reason you said, I'm not going to war.
Okay.
How can you do that? Your neighbors will see it. So it's really a citizen army that can overnight go to war at the snap of a finger. And that is what Jameson didn't realize. Even at that unprepared phase of the Boers, overnight they raised the commander and they ran smack into the Jameson raid and they stopped them in their tracks. And nobody expected.
Yeah.
But that's long and short. There wasn't a professional army. It wasn't an army of Boers. It was simply farmers and shopkeepers and professionals and politicians and whoever was commandeered up and they went to war. That is how the Boers fought the war.
And they had to take their rifle, their ammunition, their horse, and enough food for 7 days, as I recall the thing, and off you went. I mean, I just never. It was a matter of honor to go. That's the bit that I needed to understand for myself, because they weren't paid. You know, the Brits signed up for the King's shilling. They were paid a pittance, but they were paid. These people were not paid. They just went because it was their duty.
It was their duty. If you were called up, you went to war. That is how it always was. What would have happened? Let's say it was still back in the days of the troubles with black tribes. If half of the district all of a sudden said, no, we're not going to war, we rather would stay at home. The blacks would have come in, the black tribes, and simply killed them off in the masses.
Yeah.
It's so part of the psyche of, it's still today part of the psyche of the Afrikaner, the Bush War. We're going to speak long hours about the Bush War, because that was also it was a nation going to war and going to fight the communists in Angola.
Yeah,
it was exactly the same at that point. It's so part of the psyche of the Afrikaner.
I've been meaning to ask you, Schalk, that when we get up to that year, could you please go into a ton of detail? Because a lot of people in other shows are asking me at the moment about the Bush War. And the sad thing is that all three of my brothers and my father fought in that. But it was a taboo subject at home. I think it was too painful. So we as the women didn't get told very much about that. And so I'm sadly have a gap there of ignorance. And I was hoping that when we get to there, that you will educate me, please, because so many people are asking me questions about it and I can't answer them.
It was a silent war. It was indeed a silent war.
Yeah.
There was, of course, a certain amount of certain part of it was the South African government that didn't want to bring the face of the war to the public in South Africa. That's true. But I think on a much simpler level, it was just simply, we go, we do our job, and we get out. Like Afrikaners have always done the thing. And that's why.
Schalk,
yes, that.
When they fought this Boer War, is it true that they were allowed to go home and do the harvesting and then come back again?
Yes, they indeed got orders or permission to do that. They could go home and do certain farming activities there. Not everybody, of course, but yes. they indeed were allowed to do that. They were allowed, because they were still farmers. Although they are lying at the front at Colenso and the Tukulera River in Natal fighting the British, they're still a farmer. They're still farmers. They have to keep their business going. So that's a fact. It's a fact that they could go back for harvesting and so forth.
Yeah, and I'm sure when we come to the actual Boer War, people will understand why that was so important, that they could go home and harvest. But it just amazes me that such a loose-knit, seemingly disorganized process worked so well. I see that we've maybe got 5 or 10 minutes left, so I don't want to go start the Boer War yet. But for me, it's amazing that these loose-knit band of people could form such an incredible, almost invincible army at such a short notice. It is an amazing thing, is it not, Skulk?
It was an amazing thing, and it certainly caught the British more than once. Majuba, they didn't expect Majuba because they were sitting in this is now the First World War. They were sitting high on top of Majuba mountain, and traditionally in warfare, if you're on high ground like that, I don't know if you ever visited Majuba. It's high and it's difficult terrain. You don't climb a mountain and go and defeat somebody on top of a mountain.
No.
And all of a sudden, during the morning of Majuba, all of a sudden the British realized the Boers are not on the low plains below anymore. They are actually climbing the mountain now. And I think it caused such an amount of shock to the British, just that tactic alone, that they were petrified. And the next moment, the British, the Boers are upon them. They are actually climbing a mountain to go and defeat the army on top of a mountain. Nobody fight like that. It's not in the manuals. You don't learn these things at military school. How do you respond to it? And I think that is what caught the British so unawares more than once. You also see the use of trench warfare. Remember that the Boers are not professional soldiers. They don't have the faintest idea of how to fight a war, but they invent trench warfare. It's not in a manual. It's nowhere. Nobody knows about how to fight war in trenches. The last time trench warfare was fought was in the 1600s in Europe.
Yeah.
People forgot about how to fight a trench war. The Boers come.
They invented guerrilla warfare, as far as I can see, because, man,
Yes.
in World War, they were so good at that. That's one of my favorite pictures that I paint, is them fighting this guerrilla war, which was also unheard of. So these poor British people who had this idea of you march to war in your white pants and your red jacket and the drums beating and clouds of dust up behind you, they literally had no chance against these people who didn't know that that's how a war should be fought. Nobody told
you exactly. We fought it like it was like the cards are dealt with us. That's how we play the game now. If you go and look and we're going to speak about the Boer War, the tactics being fought there and these things, and it's amazing what happened there.
Yeah.
But if you look at the Battle of Colenso, for instance, one of the first big battles that the British lost against the Boers. Andy Wauchope and his Scots go and march into an area shoulder to shoulder. They go and march onto the trenches of the Boers, shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah.
And the Boers simply start shooting. And they cut down 900 Scotchmen in Scotland in about an hour's time. It's unheard of. The Europeans don't know how to fight a modern war, and that is the problem that the British had. And the tactics were still based on Napoleon's wars a century back. And it's not criticism. It's just simply nobody in Europe thought that this is how war is going to be fought. Trench warfare. As I said, we have these two pictures of the Boer War. The conventional phase, where we were still fighting the British on a certain front, either on the Western Front at Magersfontein or the Eastern Front in Natal. And there they dig trenches. They dig trenches and it becomes an entrenched front. Now this is the first time this happens in war. The next time it happens is 15 years later in the First World War, of course, it's the British. The British know how to fight trench warfare. Because they saw it with the Boers. Otherwise, the First World War would have gone down totally different. It was once again these bloody Afrikaners that screw up everything again. Because that is what happens here. The British see how trench warfare is fought, and at Mons in 1914 in the fields of Belgium, they dig trenches and they stop the oncoming German army right there and then. That is how they stopped the Germans, because they used tactics that they learned in the Boer War. But you have these two scenarios: the conventional war being trench warfare, and the Boers excel at this. Magersfontein is fought, and this huge battle in which it is this embarrassing defeat for the defeat for the British Empire on the plains of Margaretfontein, just across from Kimberley, which they had to early on they took from the Boers. They are defeated there in detail. In Natal, they are defeated on the Tugela front at Colenso time and again, because they simply didn't know how to fight the Boers. Then the conventional phase stops because the numbers of British coming in is so vast. We're sitting on the one hand with about 50,000 Afrikaners, 50,000 Boers in the field. On the other side, 255 times as many British now coming on shore. So the front started to collapse. Paardenberg also happens where Cronje had to give over from his own stupidity. 7,000 Boers had to surrender there. And the front on the Natal side start to destabilize, and then the second phase of the war emerges, and that is the guerrilla phase of the war, of smaller groups of Boers moving fast, beating and moving out again.
Scott, we are out of time. I can't believe that 2 hours has flown so quickly. But if you'll hold that thought, we will begin with that phase of the Boer War next time we have you on. And as always, I really want to thank you so much, Scott, for devoting so much of your time to us for this, because I just feel that if people understand where South African and Afrikaners came from, they might be a little more sympathetic to where we are today. So I really, really heartfelt thank you for doing this for us.
No, it's totally my pleasure. Thank you very much, Karin, and the crew, and Mel, and thank you very much for everybody for this opportunity to do this for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. It's been a pleasure as always to have you with us, and it's been great to have you for a third segment. We look forward to the next installment, which will be here live on Stop South African Genocide, live on Conscious Consumer Network. And that is it from me and Karin and Scott for this evening. Please do check out the archive on ccn.media, and of course check out the broadcast about on consciousconsumernetwork.tv. And as always, please keep paying attention to the South African cause. We do this because we love you all and we genuinely care about the future of humanity. That's it. Take care, guys. See you again. Lots of love. Goodbye.
Good night.
Good night.
If we want to change the world, we must first change the media. Mainstream media exists for the purposes of indoctrination and manipulation of public perception. The world of free and independent media is growing, and with the upsurge in information now available in the public domain, it has never been easier to access free and independent media. The exploration of this information resulted in an experimental project which would provide a fully supported space for researchers, whistleblowers, and seekers of all kinds to express themselves and educate the world. On the 1st of January 2015, Conscious Consumer Network was launched to the world. Nobody thought we would make it this far, but CCN is the longest running free and independent media network of its kind. CCN is a unique collaboration of hearts and souls, bringing you information from different perspectives to educate and inform. Since we started CCN, we have had only one desire: the pursuit of a free, fair, just, sustainable world, and this has not changed. Having overcome many challenges over the last 2 years, CCN is here to stay, and we've got great things lined up for 2017. Help keep CCN on the air by supporting the 2017 Network Support Fund.